People believe that change is difficult, that they need years of effort, endless therapies, or improbable miracles. Few understand that transformation begins with something much simpler and, at the same time, profoundly powerful: pretending. Not foolish pretending, used to hide the truth, but the conscious act of becoming what you are not yet, until the new version becomes inevitable. The entire world functions as a vibrational mirror, reflecting the role each person chooses to play. And, even without realizing it, people live repeating the same scripts, playing the same character: the one who complains, who doubts, who fears. But life's stage doesn't change until the actor changes roles. That's why some spend decades in the same cycle, waiting for a sign that never comes, while others seem lucky, when in reality, they learned the secret the ancient masters already knew: you become what you represent with conviction. This is the point where pretending reveals itself as a spiritual art. When someone acts as if they've already won, the body begins to respond differently. The mind reorganizes itself, emotions realign, and the universe, without hesitation, returns the same vibration. Pretending is accelerating the time of transformation, it's collapsing the future into the present. But this idea frightens because it challenges common logic. Society teaches that you must be true, but never explain that true doesn't mean remaining trapped in the past. Being true is being faithful to the essence that wants to emerge. It's allowing the old character to die so the new one can be born. And this symbolic death happens when the human being has the courage to lie to themselves in a sacred way, saying, "I already am what I am becoming." And that's what we're going to talk about now: the hidden power behind conscious pretending. A power that transforms identity, reframes history, and reveals the creative nature of those who awaken. If you understand this principle to the end, you'll hardly be able to look at yourself in the mirror the same way again. When we observe a child taking their first steps, we witness something profoundly mystical happening before our eyes. That small being doesn't know how to walk, their muscles don't yet possess the necessary memory, their brain hasn't completely mapped the neural circuits that will transform those clumsy movements into firm and confident steps. And yet, what do? They pretend they know how to walk. They stand up, wobble, fall, stand up again, and keep pretending until, in a magical moment that no one can pinpoint exactly when it happens, they simply walk. The pretending dissolved into reality. This process isn't exclusive to childhood. It's the fundamental mechanism through which every human being navigates the experience of being alive. When you learned to speak, you didn't start by pronouncing perfectly articulated words. You babbled, imitated sounds without understanding them, pretended you spoke long before you actually mastered language. And through that persistent pretending, language became part of you, as natural as breathing. Bentov used to say that consciousness evolves through patterns of repetition, and that each repetition refines the vibrational frequency until a new reality establishes itself. Conscious pretending is exactly that, the intentional repetition of a behavior pattern until it resonates at the frequency of your existence. We're not talking about falsehood or deception. We're talking about one of the most fundamental principles of human transformation. Modern society has created an unhealthy aversion to the concept of pretending. People repeat like mantras: be authentic, be yourself, don't pretend to be who you're not. But these same people forget that they spent years pretending to be students to become professionals, pretending to have courage when they were terrified, pretending confidence in job interviews until they got the position. Conscious pretending doesn't deny your authenticity, it expands it. It's the vehicle through which you access superior versions of yourself that already exist in potential, waiting to be activated. Think about great athletes. When a beginner runner decides to train for a marathon, they're not a marathoner on the first day of training. They pretend to be. They wake up early as a marathoner would, they follow a training routine as a marathoner would follow, they eat and rest like a marathoner. They're pretending. But this pretending is literally rebuilding their body, reformulating their muscle cells, expanding their cardiovascular capacity, reprogramming their mind to endure discomfort. On marathon day, when they cross the finish line, they're no longer pretending. They have become. Modern neuroscience confirms what mystics always knew. The brain doesn't distinguish between a real experience and an intensely imagined experience. When you act like the person you want to become, you're literally creating new neural circuits, new synaptic connections that sustain this new identity. Each act of conscious pretending is a brick in the construction of your new reality. And just as a house isn't built with a single brick, but with thousands of them placed one after another, your transformation happens through persistent repetition of this pretending. What makes this process even more fascinating is that it's not linear. You don't pretend for 30 days and then, magically, on the 31st day wake up transformed. Transformation happens in layers, in waves. Some days you'll feel that the new identity is already real. Other days you'll return to old patterns and wonder if anything really changed. But each cycle of pretending, each time you choose to act like the superior version of yourself even when you don't feel like it, you're engraving this new pattern more deeply into the structure of your consciousness. And here lies something few understand. Conscious pretending isn't about denying who you are now. It's about recognizing that who you are now is just one of the infinite possibilities of what you can be. Each human being contains multitudes, entire universes of unmanifested potential. When you pretend to be more confident, more courageous, more disciplined, you're not creating something from nothing. You're giving permission for a part of you that already exists, but was dormant, to begin awakening and taking form in physical reality. We all live inside a story. Not the story that happens around us, but the story we tell ourselves about who we are. This internal narrative is so powerful that it shapes every decision we make, every opportunity we accept or reject, every limit we respect or transgress. You define yourself through these stories. I'm shy, I'm impulsive, I'm terrible with money, I never finish what I start. And these definitions become self-fulfilling prophecies, invisible prisons built with words. Bentov had a fascinating perspective on this. He saw reality as a series of vibrational patterns, and each pattern created a specific experience. When you repeat the same story about yourself day after day, year after year, you're maintaining a stable vibrational pattern. This pattern attracts experiences that confirm the story. If you see yourself as someone who never has luck, the brain will filter reality seeking evidence of this lack of luck, ignoring all the times things went right. The story feeds itself, creating a perpetual loop. But here's the secret that can liberate anyone. If you created this story, you can rewrite it. The narrative isn't an objective truth engraved in cosmic stone. It's a mental construction, flexible and malleable like clay. The problem is that most people never realize they have the pen in their hand. They believe they're passive characters in a story written by external forces, when in reality they're simultaneously author, narrator, and main character. When you decide to pretend a new identity, you're doing something revolutionary. You're assuming the role of conscious author. You're telling the universe that the old story no longer serves, that it's time for a new chapter with a different protagonist. And what's most interesting is that the world around you will begin to respond to this new character. People treat you according to the energy you project. If you enter a room pretending confidence, people will perceive you as someone confident. If you act like someone who deserves respect, you'll be treated with respect. This isn't manipulation. It's quantum physics applied to consciousness. At the fundamental level of reality, the observer affects the observed. The way you observe yourself literally changes what you are. When you change the internal narrative, when you begin to see yourself through a different lens, the very structure of your life experience reorganizes itself to reflect this new vision. It's like adjusting a radio's frequency. The station was always there, broadcasting, but you couldn't capture the signal because you were tuned to another frequency. Observe how this works in practice. Someone who always saw themselves as disorganized begins to pretend they're an organized person. This person makes their bed every morning, even if at first it seems forced and artificial. They organize their work desk before leaving, plan the next day before sleeping. In the first days, everything seems like theater. But something interesting begins to happen. This person's mind begins to identify with the acts of organization. Small changes appear naturally. They start arriving on time to appointments, stop losing important objects, feel less anxiety because their external life reflects order. The story changed because the main character changed. What's fascinating is that this process doesn't require you to completely believe in the new identity from the beginning. Bentov always emphasized that belief follows action, not the other way around. You don't need to have absolute faith that you're a new person to start acting like them. In fact, it's precisely because you don't yet completely believe that pretending is necessary. You pretend until repetition creates familiarity, until familiarity creates comfort, until comfort transforms into naturalness, until naturalness dissolves into authenticity. Many people resist this because they confuse pretending with falsehood. They say they want to be genuine, authentic, true to themselves. But what is being true to yourself when the self is a constantly evolving construction? You're not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your body's cells have been replaced, your memories have been rewritten each time you access them, your beliefs have changed, your fears have evolved. The self is a process, not a fixed object. Consciously pretending is simply taking the reins of this evolutionary process instead of letting it happen randomly and reactively. And then life becomes a stage where you can experiment with different versions of yourself. Not out of vanity or superficiality, but because you realize that identity is a tool for exploring consciousness. Each new identity you experiment with reveals different aspects of reality, opens doors to experiences that were blocked by the old narrative. You begin to play with who you can be, testing the limits of the possible, discovering that these limits were much more flexible than you imagined. In ancient traditions, identity change has always been treated as a sacred and transformative event. When Abram becomes Abraham, when Jacob becomes Israel, when Saul becomes Paul, we're not witnessing just a name exchange. We're seeing the symbolic representation of a death and rebirth. The old self needs to die so the new self can emerge. But this death isn't literal, it's a death of the old narrative, of the old vibrational frequency, of the old pattern of being. Bentov deeply understood this principle. He said that human consciousness functions like a hologram, where each part contains the whole. Inside you exists the totality of all human possibilities, the saint and the sinner, the coward and the hero, the wise and the fool. All these archetypes reside in the field of potentiality of your consciousness. When you pretend to be someone different, you're not becoming another person. You're accessing a different facet of the multidimensional diamond you already are. What happened to those biblical and mythological characters wasn't that they became someone completely new. It's that they remembered who they really were beneath the layers of social conditioning, trauma, fear, and limitation. Abraham always had within him the capacity to be the father of nations. Paul always carried the potential to be a spiritual transformer. But these superior versions were covered, dormant, waiting for the right moment to be activated. When you decide to consciously pretend, you're initiating this same process of remembering. You're not inventing a fictional person. You're removing the false masks that were placed on you by family, by society, by painful experiences of the past. These masks became so familiar that you confuse them with your real face. But beneath them always existed a truer identity, more powerful, more aligned with your original purpose. This process of remembering requires courage, because it means abandoning the security of the known identity. However limiting and painful the old version of you may be, it's familiar. The human brain loves familiarity because it signals safety. Even if you're suffering, even if you're trapped in destructive patterns, at least you know what to expect. The unknown frightens because it offers no guarantees. Pretending a new identity is diving into this unknown. It's betting that something better exists on the other side of transformation. And this is where practice becomes spiritual. When you maintain the new identity even without immediate evidence that it's working, you're practicing faith in the deepest sense of the word. Not blind faith in external divinities, but faith in consciousness's inherent capacity to shape reality. You're saying through your actions that you trust the transformation process, that you believe in the infinite plasticity of the human being, that you know change is not only possible but inevitable when intention is clear and action is consistent. Mystics always knew this. The oldest spiritual practices in the world are based on this principle of pretending until embodying. The monk who meditates every day is pretending to be enlightened until enlightenment becomes their nature. The devotee who practices compassion is pretending to be compassionate until compassion flows naturally from their heart. The warrior who trains tirelessly is pretending to be invincible until their mind and body embody this invincibility. Conscious pretending isn't profane, it's the most sacred transformation technology humanity has ever developed. Bentov used to use the analogy of a crystal. When you apply a specific frequency to a crystal, it begins to vibrate at that frequency. If you maintain the frequency long enough, the crystal's molecular structure reorganizes itself to naturally resonate at that frequency. The same happens with human consciousness. When you consistently behave according to a new identity, you're applying a new frequency to the structure of your consciousness. At first, the resonance is forced, artificial. But with repetition, the structure itself reorganizes, and what was once pretending becomes the new natural configuration of your being. This isn't a process of self-deception. It's the opposite of that. It's the process of removing the deception that was always there, the illusion that you're limited, small, incapable. You're not lying to yourself when you pretend to be confident, courageous, or prosperous. You're unmasking the lies that were planted in you since childhood, the lies that say you're not enough, that you don't deserve, that you'll never make it. Conscious pretending is a declaration of war against these lies. It's the refusal to continue living a diminished life when greatness was always an available option. And when you begin to remember who you really are, when you begin to access these superior versions that were always dormant inside you, something magical happens. The universe conspires in favor of the new identity. Opportunities appear, the right people emerge on the path, resources materialize in unexpected ways. Not because you're manipulating reality through some mystical trick, but because you finally aligned yourself with the frequency where these things already existed waiting for you. But the universe doesn't deliver transformation on a silver platter. It doesn't believe in you simply because you decided to change. It needs proof. And that's why every genuine transformation goes through a testing period, a moment when everything seems to conspire to make you return to the old identity. Bentov called this field resistance, the natural tendency of any system to return to its previous equilibrium state when disturbed. You announce to yourself that you're now a disciplined person, and the next day everything goes wrong. The alarm doesn't ring, traffic is impossible, 1,000 distractions arise. You decide to be someone prosperous and financially responsible, and suddenly unexpected expenses appear. The refrigerator breaks, the car needs repair. You choose to be courageous and assertive, and immediately situations appear that require you to confront your greatest fears. This isn't bad luck. This is the universe asking, are you really this new person, or are you still just playing at being? This testing period is where most people give up. They interpret difficulties as signs that the change wasn't meant to be, that maybe they really are that old and limited version of themselves. They run back to the comfort zone because, at least there, things are predictable. But what they don't realize is that giving up at the moment of the test is like turning off the oven in the middle of the steel forging process. The metal was almost ready to acquire the new form, but without the necessary final heat, it returns to its previous state. The test doesn't appear to defeat you. It appears to consolidate the new identity. Each time you maintain the posture of the new version of yourself in the face of a trial, you're engraving this identity more deeply into the structure of your consciousness. Each time you choose to act like the person you decided to be, even when everything around seems to be falling apart, you're sending an unequivocal message to the universe and to your own subconscious. This change is real, this transformation is non-negotiable. Bentov had a fascinating vision about this. He said that consciousness evolves through cycles of expansion and contraction, like a muscle that needs to be tensioned to grow. When you stretch to reach a new identity, consciousness expands. But soon after comes the contraction, the moment when you're pulled back to old patterns. If you resist this contraction, if you remain firm in the new identity despite the pressure, the next expansion cycle takes you even further. But if you yield to the contraction, you return to the starting point and need to restart the entire process. What makes this test even more challenging is that it doesn't come only from external circumstances. It also comes from within. Your own mind will rebel against change. Thoughts of doubt will arise with full force. Who do you think you are, pretending to be this person? You won't be able to maintain this. You've always been this way and always will be. These voices aren't the truth about you, they're just the echo of old patterns trying to preserve themselves. Every system resists change because change means death for the old configuration. The people around you will also test the new identity, often without even realizing they're doing it. They'll make comments that try to push you back to the old version. You've changed, you're not fun anymore, you're getting weird. They don't do this out of malice. They do it because your change threatens the equilibrium of the social system in which you're inserted. If you can change, it means they can too, and that's scary for those who prefer the illusion that things are fixed and immutable. Staying firm during the test requires something deeper than willpower. It requires conviction. You need to be absolutely certain that the new identity isn't optional, that returning to the old version simply isn't an acceptable possibility. When you reach this level of determination, something interesting happens. The tests don't stop immediately, but you stop being shaken by them. You develop an internal stability that remains unshakable regardless of external storms. And then, gradually, the tests begin to decrease in intensity. Not because the universe decided to be gentler with you, but because you proved that the new identity is consolidated. You pass the exam. Transformation is no longer a future possibility, it's a present reality. What was pretending became substance. What was conscious effort became automatic behavior. You no longer need to pretend to be this person because you simply are. Bentov said this is the moment when the frequency stabilizes. The crystal finished reorganizing itself into the new molecular structure. Consciousness found a new equilibrium point, higher, more expansive, more aligned with true potential. And from this new plateau, you can clearly see that the person you were before was just a pale shadow of what you were always capable of being. But the process doesn't end there. Because once you understand the mechanism of transformation, once you experience firsthand that it's possible to radically change who you are, a new horizon opens. You realize that this new identity, however superior it may be to the previous one, still isn't the limit. It's just another step on the infinite ladder of consciousness evolution. So you reach the point where theory needs to transform into concrete practice. All this understanding about the power of conscious pretending, about the mutable nature of identity, about tests and the consolidation of transformation, all of this remains only as intellectual knowledge until you do something with it. And the first practical step is so simple that many people underestimate it. Give your new version a name. Bentov always emphasized the importance of symbols and rituals in the transformation of consciousness. A name is much more than a label. It's a declaration of intention, a focal point for the energy of change, a constant reminder of who you're choosing to be. When you name the new identity, you're doing what the ancients always did when going through profound initiations. You're symbolically marking the end of a cycle and the beginning of another. This name doesn't need to be literal. You don't need to change your birth certificate or start demanding that people call you differently. The name can exist only in the internal territory of your consciousness, but it needs to accurately represent the essence of the transformation you're seeking. If you're leaving behind shyness and embracing courage, perhaps the new version is someone bold, fearless, who takes up space without asking permission. If you're abandoning financial chaos and choosing prosperity, perhaps the new version is someone who treats money with reverence and intelligence, who sees abundance as a natural right. But naming is just the beginning. The true daily practice consists of asking a simple question before each decision, each action, each word. What would this new version of me do in this moment? When the alarm rings and you want to hit the snooze button for the 5th time, ask, would the disciplined person I decided to be hit snooze or get up immediately? When an opportunity arises that frightens but could change your life, ask, would the courageous person I'm becoming retreat or advance despite the fear? This practice transforms every moment of the day into an opportunity to consolidate the new identity. You don't need to wait for grand occasions or monumental decisions. Transformation happens in the accumulation of 1,000 small choices that, in isolation, seem insignificant, but together completely redesign the map of your existence. Each time you choose to act according to the new identity, instead of falling into the autopilot of old patterns, you're voting in favor of transformation. And here's something crucial that needs to be said with complete clarity. Stop complaining. Complaining is the language of the old identity. It's the way the old self maintains its existence through constant repetition of the victimization narrative. When you complain, you're reinforcing the story that things happen to you, that you're passive before circumstances, that life is something you suffer rather than something you create. The new identity doesn't complain because it understands it's the author of its own story, not a victim of it. Bentov had an elegant way of explaining this. He said that complaining is a form of low-frequency energy that keeps consciousness trapped in dense and limited patterns. Every time you complain, you're emitting a vibrational signal that tells the universe, "Give me more reasons to complain." And the universe, being the perfect mirror it is, responds by bringing exactly that. When you stop complaining and begin to act, even in the face of difficult circumstances, you change the frequency of the signal. Now you're saying, I'm someone who solves, who creates, who transforms obstacles into opportunities. The new identity also requires that you assume total responsibility for your life. Not responsibility in the sense of guilt or self-flagellation, but responsibility in the sense of power. When you recognize that everything in your life is a direct or indirect result of your conscious and unconscious choices, you recover the power to change everything. As long as you blame your parents, the government, the economy, the past, you remain powerless. The moment you assume you're the creator of your own reality, you become capable of recreating that reality. There will be days when it will seem impossible to maintain the new identity. There will be moments when the distance between who you are now and who you want to be will seem so great that you'll want to give up. In those moments, remember, you don't need to close the entire distance at once. You only need to take the next step. You only need to make the next choice aligned with the new identity. One step at a time, one choice at a time, the distance diminishes until it disappears completely. And finally, understand this. Conscious pretending isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more true, more aligned with the potential that was always inside you, closer to the version of yourself you came to this world to be. You're not trying to transform yourself into someone unreal or unattainable. You're simply removing the layers of conditioning, fear, and limitation that were hiding who you really are. Each day you choose to consciously pretend, you're saying yes to the evolution of your consciousness. You're actively participating in the most sacred process that exists, the awakening of a human being to their true power. And when you look back in a few months or years, will you recognize yourself? Probably not. Because you will have become unrecognizable. Not because you pretended to be someone else, but because you stopped pretending to be less than you always were. When the human being understands that reality responds to the role they choose to play, a new kind of freedom is born within them. The freedom to reinvent themselves, to create their own character with full awareness. This creation isn't a game of vanity, but a profound spiritual act, a gesture of self-recognition. Because, by shaping the new version of themselves, they approach their original essence, that part that always knew what it came to express in this world. Creating a new character is much more than changing behavior or pretending to be someone different. It's reprogramming the mind and the energetic field to sustain a vibration that previously seemed distant. It's choosing a posture that represents inner maturity. Each trait of this character, the way of speaking, the form of walking, the serenity in the gaze, is a vibrational affirmation of who the being is becoming. It's not about wearing a mask, but revealing what was always behind the old ones. By deciding who they will be from now on, the individual assumes responsibility for their own destiny. They no longer wait for the world to recognize them to feel worthy. They recognize themselves. This is the key to transmutation. Stopping complaining about life and starting to act like someone who has already found the balance they were seeking. Courage replaces fear, and purpose occupies the space that once belonged to doubt. The new character isn't born from ego, but from the awareness that everything can be reframed through attitude. At this point, conscious pretending transforms into spiritual practice. Each action aligned with the new identity sends a clear message to the universe. I am this version now. And the universe, which responds to frequencies, doesn't question whether it's truth or pretending. It simply mirrors what is sustained with firmness. Gradually, situations begin to change, people around react differently, and the external world adjusts to the new pattern the human being decided to maintain. This transformation doesn't ask for haste. It flourishes with constancy. Each day, a small gesture reinforces the new narrative, the way of breathing, of thinking, of responding to life. The character grows, strengthens, gains soul. And, when it finally becomes natural, the old self ceases to have power. Everything that once seemed unattainable becomes part of daily life, because the individual began to live as if they already were. Creating the new character is the point where pretending becomes truth. And when this truth consolidates, the being no longer needs to prove anything, only to live in coherence with what they chose to be. It's in this silence of authenticity that consciousness discovers the most subtle secret of existence. Transforming yourself isn't conquering something new, but remembering what always was, and was just waiting to be played. The answer to all these questions is within you. Each attitude, each word, and each thought are rehearsals of the new character the universe awaits to see born. Transformation doesn't happen when everything changes out there. It begins when you decide to play the highest role of yourself, and sustain that choice until pretending becomes truth. If this message made sense to you, practice today. Choose a new posture, a new energy, a new story. Observe the world respond. And when you realize that the stage of your life has begun to move, come back here and tell me what changed. Take this moment to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This way, you continue learning to use consciousness as a transformation tool and discover how to master your own vibrational field, step by step. Because pretending, when done with intention, is remembering who you always were, a creator in full awakening.